A lot of people think the woman who sued McDonald's is kind of a scam artist, and that could not be further from the truth. So today we're gonna be talking about a woman named Stella Liebeck. It was about a week after Stella had retired and her son Jim flew out to celebrate and spend some time with her. But his trip came to an end and he had to go back, so Stella was gonna be taking him to the airport. He had an early morning flight. So they decided to stop at the nearby Golden Arches, McDonald's. They went through the drive-thru and Chris ordered a value meal and Stella ordered a little 49-cent cup of coffee. After they picked up their food at the window, they drove over to a spot in the parking lot and parked so they could get organized and situate, get, some coffee creamer and sugar into Stella's cup. He was driving a 1989 Ford Probe and it didn't have cup holders actually. So Stella kind of held it between her legs. She balanced it and then she tried removing the lid. And as she was taking the lid off, the cup flipped upside down and poured all over her legs.
Wanted to get the top off to put cream and sugar in, so I put it between my knees to steady it with this hand, trying to get the top off, and it just went,
And as soon as the coffee hit her, she started screaming because it was scalding hot. And she was wearing a sweatsuit, so it was soaked and stuck to her skin, and she literally could not get away from it. She tried to get out of the car as fast as she could, and then of course pulled the sweatpants off, but the damage was done.
All I remember is trying to get out of the car. I screamed, not realizing I was burned that bad. I knew I was in terrible pain.
During the drive, she was nauseous and lightheaded. She was also cold and shaking uncontrollably. And when they got to the hospital, they were told there was a multi-car accident and they were treating multiple victims from that, so the wait was gonna be way too long. And at this point, Stella was in so much pain that she was starting to go into shock. And Stella was admitted 45 minutes after initially being burned. And as soon as the ER doctor saw how bad her burns were, they were horrific, he immediately called in the burn specialist. And he was shocked too. I mean, her injuries were far worse than anyone really could have imagined. And the doctors weren't even sure if Stella would survive.
I was burned so severely that they didn't think I would live.
I'm a nurse and I was horrified at the type of injuries that she had sustained, the skin grafts and the pieces that were still ongoing.
The coffee had burned over 16% of her body. All of her inner thighs, her area, her groin area, and 6% of those burns were full thickness burns, otherwise known as their degree burns.
A third degree burn or a full thickness burn means that the entire layer of skin is burnt through, is gone.
And this treatment is so painful, and also it's very, very expensive. So Stella, at 79 years old, freshly retired, has these horrific burns. She had to be in the hospital for 8 days straight, and during that time she lost 20 pounds. And Stella was a very small woman. This was 20% of her body weight, so now she was 83 pounds. And even though doctors were very unsure if Stella would survive, she did, and she was released from the hospital. And of course, she was left with really horrific scars, and she was disabled for the next 2 years. And her medical bills really racked up quickly. People really tried to paint Stella as this person who was out to scam McDonald's, spilled hot coffee on herself. Most people who see those pictures especially think that Stella should have been entitled to some type of compensation for everything that she went through. But Stella didn't even want to sue McDonald's actually. At first, all she wanted was compensation for her medical bills and for her daughter's lost wages while she was taking care of her. And she just wanted McDonald's to know that their coffee was being served way too hot and prevent this from possibly happening to someone else.
I was not in it for the money. I was in it because I wanted to bring the temperature down so that other people will not go through the same thing.
So her daughter added up all the medical bills, all the lost wages, and everything totaled up to about $18,000. So she wrote a letter to McDonald's, asked them if they could pay this amount, explained how horrific this was for their mother, and she at this point thought this was a one-time mistake. So she asked McDonald's to just check all of their coffee machines and make sure that none of them were serving coffee that was scalding hot. Now at this time, and keep in mind it was the 90s, McDonald's was making $1.3 million per day just on coffee. So you'd think that this would be a no-brainer for them and super easy. All they have to do is send the money that this woman is requesting, and she's not even gonna sue them. It's a good deal. But they decided to get back to her and offer her $800 out of that $18,000. So obviously Stella's family was very upset. They felt like at this point they needed to get a lawyer and that maybe they should sue. But Stella was still very hesitant about the whole thing. She had never filed a lawsuit before, and she'd already been through so much stress. But she really just didn't have any other choice because $800 was not even going to come close to covering her medical bills. She needed this money. So Stella worked with two lawyers named Ken Wagner and Reed Morgan. They filed a lawsuit against McDonald's for gross negligence for selling coffee that was unreasonably dangerous and defectively manufactured.
We bought a product, it was used as intended, it was unreasonably hot and therefore unreasonably dangerous, and those were the essential facts.
And there were several attempts to settle the lawsuit before the trial even started. At first, her lawyers offered to settle for $90,000, but McDonald's said no. So they went back to the drawing board and actually asked for $300,000 the second time, and of course McDonald's said no. So they had a mediator, which is a middleman, come in and try to settle the lawsuit, and they suggested that about $225,000 would be fair to settle at. But McDonald's refused, and that went absolutely nowhere. So they had to move forward with a trial. So the trial of Liebeck versus McDonald's restaurants began on August 8th, 1994. Stella's attorneys argued that McDonald's was serving their coffee way too hot and doing it on purpose. They argued that they were requiring their franchise owners to serve coffee at dangerously hot temperatures. According to their official franchise rules at the time, their coffee had to be served between 180 and 190 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 30 degrees hotter than most at-home coffee machines, and other restaurants usually serve their coffee between 140 and 160 degrees. And liquid that's 190 degrees Fahrenheit can definitely cause third-degree burns in just 2 to 7 seconds. And of course, the hotter a liquid is, the faster the skin burns. So they started arguing in court that if McDonald's just served their coffee like 20 degrees lower, then it would take up to 20 seconds for someone to get a third-degree burn, which gives you a lot more time. This would give someone a chance to remove any clothing they have, especially if they're wearing something like sweatpants. And they also brought up that McDonald's had a long history of ignored complaints about customers specifically that had been burned. It turns out that in just 10 years, 1982 to 1992, their coffee had burned more than 700 people. In most cases, it was people that did the exact same thing that Stella did, accidentally spilled the coffee on their laps in the car. And there were even some cases where employees had spilled hot coffee on customers. And these complaints came from people of all ages, from adults to infants. And during those 10 years of complaints, McDonald's, who was making like $1 million a day in coffee, had paid out $500,000 to people who had been burned by the coffee. So this was a serious issue that a lot of other people had experienced, but the media never told anyone that, of course. Now, there was a warning printed on their coffee cup, but McDonald's admitted in court that consumers were probably not aware that such serious injuries could be possible from coffee. And long before Stella was even heard, the Shriners Burn Institute had published warnings to the franchise food industry that people could get really serious burns if they were serving beverages above 130 degrees, which is 50 degrees cooler than what McDonald's was serving at the time. During the trial, McDonald's explained that the reason they like to make their coffee so hot is because oftentimes people got it on the way to work, and by the time they got to work it had cooled off and it was a perfect temperature. But it turns out that they didn't actually do any research on this. They didn't test it with commute times and stuff. They had no idea how long it was taking for their scalding hot coffee to cool down enough for someone to drink it safely. And of course, a lot of people don't want it to just sit there while they're driving to work. They want to drink it. But McDonald's said that hot coffee makes it taste better. During the trial, they confirmed that McDonald's was requiring that their coffee pot was as hot as 185 degrees Fahrenheit or more. And McDonald's also admitted that they recognized that if their coffee was consumed right away, that it would be dangerous for the consumer. But a consultant for McDonald's, of course, tried to downplay that 700-person number for their burn injuries. And basically, they argued for every one person that got burned by McDonald's coffee, about 24 million people enjoyed their coffee just fine. And they tried to use that to prove that their coffee was not unreasonably dangerous.
People interact with hot beverages all the time in a fast food restaurant, and that doesn't necessarily mean that the restaurant is doing something wrong.
So the jury ended up talking about what percentage of fault should really be given to Stella here. And they agreed that some percentage of the fault should be given to her because she did spill the coffee. It's not like someone bumped into her or a car hit her or anything. She spilled the coffee on herself. But they decided that McDonald's was definitely at fault here too, and a lot more so than Stella was. And before the jury came to their decision, they actually found out that McDonald's wasn't planning to do anything about this. They weren't going to redesign their coffee cup or get better lids, lower the temperature, nothing. Stella's doctor also testified during the trial, and it was very powerful. They said that Stella's burns were some of the worst that they had ever seen in their career. The trial finally came to an end on August 17th, 1994, after 7 days of testimony. And the jury ended up finding that both parties were at fault here. They decided that Stella was at 20% fault because she did, spill the coffee on herself, but that McDonald's was at 80% of fault because they knew that this was happening and they did nothing to fix the problem for a long time. The jury felt like the warning on the cup was not going to be enough, and it was not going to do anything to protect future consumers. At the end of everything, Stella was awarded $200,000 for her medical costs and other expenses, including just her pain and suffering. But then her compensation was reduced by 20% because she was 20% at fault, so she ended up getting $160,000. However, she was awarded $2.7 million in punitive damages, which is the equivalent of 2 days' worth of coffee revenue for McDonald's.
We looked at the coffee sales on a daily basis, and we figured about 2 days worth of coffee sales. We thought that that was, a fair amount, and punitive damages we assessed at $2.7 million.
Only way you can get the attention of a big company would be to make punitive damages against them, and this was a very small punitive damage, we thought.
Now, punitive damages are to hold the company accountable. It's basically a punishment for McDonald's as an incentive to get them to change their harmful policies. However, a judge did reduce their punitive damages from $2.7 million to $480,000. And Stella and McDonald's both appealed that decision actually in December of 1994. And after their negotiations, they settled outside of court for an undisclosed amount, so we will never know how much they ended up paying her. But as part of the settlement, Stella was not allowed to talk to the media at all about her case. And of course, this trial made headlines all over the world. It was talked about by reporters, journalists, news outlets, of course, like late night shows, daytime talk shows. And over time, they kept reporting less and less of the details accurately. And that's why a lot of people don't know the truth about this case and think that Stella is some type of scammer. The media did a great job of making Stella's case look like a complete joke.
It seems she was holding a cup between her legs while driving.
Clamped it between her legs, drove down the street, spilled it, burned herself, sued McDonald's, and collected.
And they spread so much false information about her and the case as a whole. And people really didn't have much sympathy for Stella at all. In fact, it seemed like people felt bad for McDonald's.
I mean, it's not like the McDonald's person leaned over the car and poured it. It was an accident.
It wasn't long before there were so many rumors about her, so many just blatant lies about her. People started writing her these horrible, horrible letters, death threats. And at some point along the way, the narrative became that Stella was driving while trying to drink coffee and then spilled it all over herself. Basically that she was irresponsible in this situation and she deserved what was coming to her.
Stella has received letters saying stuff like,
I was driving down the road. I had no business driving down the road with coffee between my legs and all that stuff. They're just plain ignorant.
My mother was made the villain in this story. It's like bullying. It feels like bullying.
And of course, no one was reporting about how bad Stella's injuries actually were. Most people didn't realize that Stella had almost died from spilling this coffee on her legs. People seem to believe either one of two versions of events. Either they thought that Stella purposely spilled the coffee on herself, or they believed that she was reckless while driving and holding the coffee. And pretty much everyone was under the impression that she had superficial burns at most. And the whole conversation around Stella's case ended up being kind of used as propaganda and a catalyst to completely change the American judicial system. And it all started with the term frivolous lawsuits, basically meaning lawsuits where people were making money from corporations, sometimes doing things to themselves on purpose in order to fight a case and get a bunch of money. In fact, Stella's case may actually be where this term really came from. After her injuries and all the stress from the lawsuit, Stella was really never the same again. According to her daughter, she had almost no quality of life. The settlement money did allow for her to pay for an in-home nurse to take care of her until she did eventually pass away. Stella died on August 5th, 2004 at the age of 91, which is pretty impressive to live till 91 after everything she had been through. But that is it for the McDonald's coffee lawsuit. I hope you guys enjoyed seeing Aria today. Are you gonna be able to chill? You gonna be able to hang out? She says, I don't know. Cameras make me nervous. I'm very camera shy. Are you very camera shy? Stay safe, and I will see you in my next video.